The Mirror's Edge games are interesting to look back upon today. It's a game series that went against the grain of its competition, opting for vibrancy and minimalism when grunge and grey was in fashion. It's a story-driven and linear title, which is a design choice only now seeming to come back into popular appeal. And it's politicized, kind of. It deals with protests, police, enforcement, and brutality, and resisting a state veering towards totalitarianism. It's all exaggerated and sometimes a little too on the nose, but it also all hits very close to home. There are two main titles in the franchise. The 2008 entry, which launched the franchise to pretty positive reception, followed by a slightly more controversial Mirror's Edge Catalyst in 2016. I had never played either of these games until earlier this year, after seeing I could pick up the first game during a Steam sale for a cool $3, and I thought, why the hell not? Both games introduce some interesting features, twists on gameplay, and take on their own unique stories, so we'll approach them chronologically and walk through their gameplay, characters, and stories respectively. Sound good? Good. Let's begin. A striking feature of Mirror's Edge 2008, and indeed the franchise as a whole, is the minimalist design and sparse, vivid color palette. White on white with a few rich splashes of blue, red, green. In an era where Call of Duty, Battlefield, GTA, and Fallout 3 were all the rage, these dark, gritty, and often war-torn cities, Mirror's Edge struck back against this design monotony and put something fresh and appetizing before the audience's eyes. And genuinely, it's still stunning today. The game comes off so crisp at times that it's unbelievable that more than 12 years have passed. Sure, the distant city backdrop and water graphics are nothing impressive, but moments leaping across glass skyscrapers or flying down reflective, clean corridors come off incredibly sharp. And this minimalist design has a neat in-universe explanation. Our protagonist to the franchise is Faith Connors, a runner in this unnamed city. Now, a runner is effectively a glorified courier who exists outside the law and an increasing surveillance state, meaning they have to skirt around the city's camera network and heavily armed police force with, well, a shit ton of parkour. The bright red we see everywhere is Faith's runner vision, in-game cues that tell her the best path forward and lend a helping hand at navigating the perils of the city. And that's what majority of this game is: parkour, movement, navigation. There's combat, sure, and a limited amount of gunplay, but it's hardly compelling stuff. No, the enjoyment you'll find in the game is the running, the freeform movement, and the game hinges everything on that. There's no open world, this is a linear game. There's a narrative, yes, but it fluctuates from boring to average, and there's no upgrades, no currency or skill points to improve Faith. No, the 2008 game is pure linear action in the traditional sense, and that was the perfect choice. Ignoring the absurdity of using skill points to improve Faith's running and skill set, as the sequel does, is a brilliant choice because Faith is meant to be a master in her craft. No, the pleasure of the game comes from mastering the gameplay, from moments of flow, seconds or minutes of flawless movement and unbroken momentum when you land each roll, skid and war jump, conquering every obstacle without losing a beat. But when you lose that flow, like a broken soul addicted to the pokies, you're right back on that horse wanting to try again. And you know it's possible. The game is, for the most part, very fair, and the possible skill ceiling is extremely high. People can get very, very good at this game if they want. You only need to search for a Mirror's Edge glitchless speedrun to see just how godly some players are. But do that after watching this video. I'm already pretty embarrassed enough showing off my clunky footage. As you would notice, probably the second most striking feature of the game is the first person perspective, as in genuinely first person. You're not just a gun floating in the bottom right of the screen, but your vision is attached to a head. Bouncing across rooftops, you'll see Faith's iconic red sneakers. Throw a punch and you'll see the arm fly out from the torso. Do a somersault and yeah, your screen takes you for a ride. The game totally commits to this, to a fault. Probably the only frustrating component of parkour is shuffling along a ledge. which thankfully comes infrequently, but you'll find that because Faith isn't an owl and can't rotate her head 180 degrees, you're stuck blandly facing the wall, unable to see where you're going or comfortably line up a leap when you're jumping away. It's immersion, great immersion, but limiting in these few rare examples. In a 2008 interview, senior producer Owen O'Brien commented that the team wanted to put the person back in first person, and they succeeded because there's something really powerful about playing inside Faith's head. She's an okay protagonist, no really memorable traits to her personality, though her commitment to saving her sister Kate is nice. I loved her design, the slick outfit and the chromatic tattoos, and even though it's hardly the most important thing, I think it's worth drawing some attention to the fact that Faith is an Asian female lead. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any other story-driven action games that I've played at least with this form of representation. But visuals to one side, Faith is a little dry. She's a passive character, responding to the throes of the story and events as they come hurtling towards her. Pope's murder, her sister's arrest, and even the revelation to the pretty thin mystery. She's just a vehicle for us to experience the story. But because we play inside Faith's head, maybe this is just for me, but I know I developed an emotional attachment to her stronger than I logically should have, and by the time the credits rolled and the soundtrack Still Alive kicked in, which is just a mesmerizing, totally appropriate theme song by the way, I felt really moved. And I think this comes from this irrational place of, because we're inside her as she pumps her fists, pounds her feet against the pavement and leaps from buildings, we experience everything with her. For all of it. And when we stuff up and Faith dies, there's no pussyfooting around, fade to black like in other games. In Mirror's Edge, you fall all the way off that building, see the rushing wind and the buildings flash past in a blur and hear a sickening thud as Faith's body breaks against the ground. Christ! Maybe it's a form of digital Stockholm syndrome, but something about this style of first-person gameplay is incredibly evocative, unlike anything I've ever played. Unfortunately, the other characters to the first game don't get this special treatment. Of course, by virtue of not being protagonists, we only see them from an outside perspective, often in these interesting 2D animated cutscenes, which, while not exactly high budget, I still quite like. They're refreshingly unique and allow for exaggerated moments, and also help to make the game not feel too serious. But the characters still come off as flat, and even Faith in these sequences can come off as brooding and a little hollow and lacking in personality. Really, the only thing connecting the runners' commune is the immediate goal to rescue Kate and a shared history of previous jobs that's implied but never feels lived or earned. I would say Miller, Kate's police boss chief, is the other major character that feels sufficiently developed, falling into the archetype of wanting to save Kate in his own way, playing both sides of the runners and police until finally committing to help Faith by the end, but we'll get to the story soon enough. What I want to instead say is that Mirror's Edge is not a long game, and I don't mind that. Prince of Persia: Sands of Times is one of my all-time favorite games, and I'll blow through that in an easy 6 hours. Shadow of the Colossus, maybe 7? Mirror's Edge will take the average newbie around 6 to 8 hours across its 10 levels, though one of those hardcore speedrunners will probably clear through the whole game in 1 hour. And see, that's also a bit of a problem. Not that us mere mortals choke on speedrunners' dust, but that an optimal player who hits every hurdle and stride will wrap this game up quick. And in a normal game, that wouldn't be an issue. But in Mirror's Edge, that is a problem because you realize that a lot of the time lost goes to figuring out where the hell to go. If those moments of flow represent us addicts getting just the right hit, then the moments of floundering around looking for the right ledge or path that isn't highlighted, obvious, or even clearly visible, those pauses are the withdrawal phase, and they suck. Throughout most of Faith's running, the game cleverly slots in several tricks to make sure you keep her heading in the right direction, but these are at their best in the rooftop segments. First, you'll often have Merc in Faith's earpiece yelling out directions as the game requires it, calling out cops or shortcuts you can take. Second, there's a trigger you can press to snap Faith's eyeline in the direction of the main objective, which can be handy as you're pelting full speed without a clue. thirdly, naturally, is the runner's vision that sometimes, but not always, highlights to ledges, pipes and boxes that Faith should traverse for the best course of movement. You have the general city design as well, which often nudges you into the direction of the most prominent building or landmark. And lastly, my favourite type of direction are the small pieces of surreptitious in-universe art or memorabilia that point you in the right direction, maybe without you even knowing. For example, you might pull into a corridor and a sign will point towards a bathroom or the CEO's office, or graffiti on the wall will suggest one path. Follow these because they invariably point the way Faith should go. So just there alone, we have 5 great pieces of design that help Faith keep her flow, not break her stride or loiter around. But as you might guess, sometimes these mechanics can fall to utter shit while indoors, especially in dark environments. No helpful arrows or highlights, no Merc calling out suggestions. A common rebuttal to this complaint is that the first Mirror's Edge game is also a puzzle game, but I kind of disagree. Floundering around and looking for the right path doesn't employ critical thinking, it's obfuscation and interpreting messy design. It might be 10 minutes before you notice the necessary bar you should leap to, which was plain and camouflaged next to another pipe, at which point you're left thinking, geez Faith, would have been real good if your runner's vision kicked in there. But that's a nitpick that's personal to me and might not drag the game down for you. The world of Mirror's Edge is both intriguing and difficult to pin down. On the one hand, something here feels sci-fi. The buildings are clean to the point of sterile and caged in barbed wire. Everything feels cagey and synthetic. We have a dystopic society, heavy police presence, tall skyscrapers that glow neon at night. But unequivocally, it's not futuristic. We have all these things today and more. In the same interview, O'Brien states that rather than a sci-fi city, it's rather a fictional modern city that takes on the influence of many metropolises, Dubai, Singapore, Hong Kong, and you can see it. Characteristics of those cities are all there. The game opens with a brief backstory on Kate and Faith, that her parents were activists protesting against some vague issues that included the militarizing of the police and a society that was slowly handing away its freedoms. Again, O'Brien cautions us that the world of Mirror's Edge is not a police state, but rather a controlled city that is seeing liberty fall away. At first, I found this a moot point. The writers might not see it as a police state, but that's the sentiment foisted upon us players. We punch, run past, and gun down cops the entire game. They're the ones who run after us, the ones who pin the murder of a politician on Kate and looking to take down the runners as an institution. Police violence and surveillance state seems to be the focus. But perhaps not once we dig into the story.
Training time, Faith. Yeah, I know you hate it, but that fall took you out of commission for a while. And now you're back, you gotta keep sharp, especially in this city.
The narrative starts in a somewhat uninspired way. We have a tutorial where Celeste, Faith's blonde ponytail friend, runs Faith through some drills, checks her skills are up to speed, and then, well, we're in. Robert Pope, a politician running for mayor who was apparently friends with Faith's family, has just been murdered, and we find Kate, Faith's policewoman's sibling, awkwardly standing there. She's been framed, Kate says, and only Faith can help her out of this one. For any budding writers out there, this is not a compelling start. As a newly introduced character, Pope's death means nothing to us. As a newly introduced character, Faith's predicament means little to us, and from how stilted the dialogue is, we wouldn't know what she meant to Faith if Faith hadn't pulled her in for a hug. Thankfully, the gameplay sells it. Fast, frantic, clean. Cops are pouring in and we escape flying out of the building, but there's a nagging sense that the story needs to catch up. 2 mysteries push the narrative along the following missions. The first is who murdered Pope, who framed Kate, and what's happening here. The second is a note conveniently placed on Pope's desk reading Project Icarus, sounding ominous. A good narrative will either blend its core mysteries together, like you frequently see in Star Wars or Harry Potter, or conversely, it'll play you for a fool and subvert these expectations by having these be separate and unrelated conflicts. Mirror's Edge opts for the former. After investigating a private military company, Faith stumbles across the crux of Project Icarus, a joint operation between this private military company and the city police to eliminate the runners with their own variant on runners, Pursuit Cops. So, the evil plan is to teach people parkour to eliminate the glorified couriers. Cool. A vague reason is given that it'll destroy the hope of the city, but whatever, it escalates the gameplay and it adds some fun. The second mystery is equally underwhelming. So who killed Pope? Well, it has to be a character we already knew or it wouldn't have much meaning to Faith. My first assumption was that it would actually be Kate as a nice old switcheroo and a way to punish Faith's undivided loyalty to her sister, but no. In our second mission, we have a fun sequence of chasing down Jackknife, an ex-runner and scoundrel of vague allegiances whose original character design was way cooler than the meth head we got here. He warns us to be careful who we hang out with, and lo and behold, the only other character Kate hangs out with in quiet, intimate moments ends up being the shooter, Celeste. Fine. Cool, it's all just a little underwhelming because we only saw Celeste for a few cutscenes and a tutorial mission. And after a tense confrontation, Celeste escapes, or burns to death. It's never really explained and we don't see her again, but after a cool vertical climb through a construction site, Faith eventually frees Kate from a convoy transporting her to prison, and we dash through a hotel lobby to her rescue. It's only here, at the end of the second last mission of the game, that we say goodbye to Merc as Faith gives away her earpiece to Kate, and again, moments later, after a time jump, Faith finds Merc gunned down and Kate captured once more. Merc's death is tastefully done and probably one of the better scenes of the game. So we have a final mission where we infiltrate the Shard, the most prominent skyscraper of the city, and would you believe the mastermind behind everything was the mayor who was running against Robert Pope? Gosh, what dirty politics. Anyway, these missions force you to fight back, which is a shame since dodging past enemies and escaping the cops was always more fun than engaging in the pretty lackluster gunfighting mechanics. But we gun down enemies and Faith progresses through the Shard. Miller seems to sacrifice himself for our benefit, which again, kind of touching, before finally Faith destroys the server boxes that control the city's surveillance systems. On the one hand, this is a very believable and realistic action for Faith to take, but on the other, we never understood how prolific and powerful the surveillance state was in relation to the average citizen, so it doesn't come off as strong as the developers might have hoped. And further, the action of firing a few bullets at server boxes doesn't exactly make for exciting gameplay. Finally, on the rooftop of the Shard, we have a final showdown that is a funny mashup of stupid and cool. So on the one hand, you have Faith, surrounded by guards, Jackknife revealing himself as a villain all along, a reveal I could not care less about, and him explaining that all these machinations were to draw out Faith and destroy the runners for good. Faith then parkours into a helicopter and kicks Jackknife out, who only decides to let fire on her now with his machine gun, which he had trained on her the entire time, now that he's 20 meters away instead of when he was, you know, next to her and given the classic villain spiel. On top of that, you have those guards who surrounded Faith also shooting at her while she runs at the helicopter, but then they just disappear once Faith frees Kate from that helicopter and they're never seen again. What? But on the other hand, there's a pretty nice irony to the bar of the helicopter flashing red with Faith's runner vision just as Jackknife chides her for not committing herself to anything, and so Faith takes a leap of faith to save her sister in a pretty slick move to boot him out of the chopper. And finally, Kate and Faith stare out at the city lights, standing atop the Shard, whose glass reflects the rest of the city like a mirror. They're atop the mirror's edge. I don't know what can you say? It's a cool action set piece, it's a little bit silly, but also once that soundtrack kicks in, that still alive thematic song, you just enjoy the moment. No, it's not high art, but you can appreciate it and enjoy the ending all the same. There's a purity and a freeness in its simplicity. Faith wanted to save her sister, and she did. Let the credits roll. Truly, I don't think there's much else to say about the 2008 game. I'm left intrigued by the world, and I'm keen for the sequel, excited to see what machinations Callahan, the mayor, pulls together to challenge our runners in the sequel. I want to see more of this city, and I also enjoy some of those underhanded moments of storytelling. that those half-minute periods in the elevators allow you to read the news headlines and learn just a little bit more about the growing conspiracies and civil unrest. Or when Faith is belting down corridors, she often comes across these rats scurrying away, an easy metaphor for the position of runners in that society. And I just love the aesthetic of the game. It's so unique and stands apart from everything and anything I've ever consumed in media. The developers were audacious, brave, and experimental, and even though Mirror's Edge wasn't the commercial hit they might have hoped for, it's a damn cool thing that they tried. And it was with pretty high expectations that I began to install the sequel, Mirror's Edge Catalyst, eager to see what 8 years might have allowed them to concoct.
Keeps us alive.
Well, the first hurdle to get over with Mirror's Edge Catalyst is that this is not a sequel, it's a full-on reboot. The second hurdle to overcome is that almost every single element of this game is controversial, and whether or not you like it will probably come down to personal taste. To foreshadow my sentiment, I kinda liked it. Everything except the actual narrative I viewed as a marked improvement over the first game, but we'll get to that after running through some of the shakeups Catalyst has introduced to the franchise. The first change is the worst because it involves sectioning off the story into other media. Essentially, from the moment you boot up the game, you're already on the back foot and missing out on a shitload of narrative context, particularly on Faith's relationships with the runners and other big players in the story, like Dogen, who shows up later. The game fails to fill in these blanks, and it's up to you to purchase the prequel comic Mirror's Edge Exordium, or watch a 15-minute YouTube summary which might just be linked in the description. And what sucks is that Exordium tells a decent quick story of Faith's beginning with the Runner's Cabal, her becoming enamored with a piece of art the crime lord Dogen owned, since not only is it the iconic tattoo she has from the first game, but here it represents a project her mother worked on. So Faith compromises her sense of decency to earn it by denying another runner life-saving medicine, but makes the moral decision at the end to pull back at the last moment and is ultimately arrested and imprisoned, where we find her at the game's start. My question is, why the hell was this not a tutorial level? But you'll see this perfectly represents Catalyst. Interesting ideas, executed poorly, but still a little bit charming. So it's a gorgeous game. The City of Glass pops off the screen, and the unnerving cleanliness of the world only adds to this creeping anxiety that something is very filthy beneath the surface. Different zones to the city have their own unique color palettes, touches of world building. The more affluent suburbs with designer apartments, decadent bedrooms, and these purple pseudo cherry blossom trees dotting the gardens, the only nature in this chromatic metropolis. As the story progresses, you'll see these environments in different hues, from sunrise to midday to evenings, when the city lights glimmer like stars and make you feel the real loneliness of the world. Honestly, the visuals alone are a great reason to pick up this game, but it's also a useful yardstick for seeing some of the holes emerging. For example, it's neat seeing Faith in reflective surfaces as you dash through glass or scale skyscrapers. Except you won't always. It's a farce. The engine wasn't built like that, so with a few exceptions, the only time Faith is reflected is when the developers purposely drew that in. Or that maybe those NPCs who stand around like stoic statues around the city yell pretty boring, repetitive, dang weird dialogue.
Most people fear Kruger-sec, but even Kruger-sec fears Dogen. You should too.
Or you might spy suits and construction workers loitering around, normally out of arm's reach, but then you realize there's no hammer rendered in, so tradies are just trying to pound metal into shape with their fists. This almost feels like a metaphor, that Catalyst gets the broad strokes right, but absent details start to accumulate and press you down until your sentiment starts to sink with the game. Again, the combat is a marked improvement. No weapons at all this time. Perfect. Faith is a runner, not a gunner, and there's some strategy here. Heavy moves like kicks have a directional element where you can choose the direction where your enemies will stagger, either off ledges or into each other or other hazardous items. Or opt for lighter attacks, less damage, but you can throw fists or slabs while keeping your running momentum, allowing you to escape or pull off sick jukes. So again, a broad stroke improvement. There's more options to do. but the outcome can also be hysterical, because almost always you opt to stagger enemies off buildings or into each other, but the ragdoll physics makes them seem like drunken sailors. They'll crash into each other with exaggerated stumbles, flopping dead on the floor like mannequins, and even funnier is that you bump people into ledges and they effectively yeet themselves into the void, just tossing themselves overboard. It's a lot. It's not hard to see how this happens. Catalyst wants some leeway with the system to give a helping hand and not let you get too bogged down in combat, since obviously it'd suck to have to repeatedly kick enemies and nudge them over the edge, but this can come off as janky. And funnily enough, I found myself very discouraged to die in this game, particularly in parkour segments, because Faith's grunts and flailings are so genuine and made my stomach roll. Overall, I do like the combat. Moving on, an open world seems the perfect fit for Mirror's Edge. You can sprint from one end of the map to the other across cranes, high rises, dashing through alleys and private suites, and once you unlock the grappling hook, you can swing over the chasms between skyscrapers. The pathways are well crafted, and there's a neat system to create your own route to race people online. And there's something slick about picking up a new quest and just sliding on out of your runner's hideout and just running straight out and seizing the world. It's awesome and it feels right, but it's also hard to get around the map. It's a little unremarkable and lacking in useful landmarks and icons, which the first game got so right. And this is a shame, since this is an open world and it would have been easy. Just throw in a few wild statues, fake forests, obnoxiously large and unique advertisements and graffitis, some color to give us direction. But without that, the clean city becomes a labyrinth that you'll never really learn to navigate. So again, I like all these changes in theory. The ideas and aspirations were on point for what an improved Mirror's Edge should look like. Some of the RPG elements like skill points and collectible side quest missions seem to miss the heart of what made the first game so lovable, that the reward was the smooth, addictive flow of running and not pumping up numbers in some vague sense of growing stronger. Which is a shame, because the running is better in this game, or feels better to me. The parkour is crazy smooth, and a few new tweaks like grappling hooks and poles to swing 90 degrees around corners, or sprinting to leap off pads to higher heights are all new neat tweaks, meaning you're less likely to lose momentum. I think Catalyst took the parkour to new heights, and that's nothing to sneeze at. But the world of Mirror's Edge is also changed. It's no longer a modern totalitarian twist on Western society, but a fully fledged new sci-fi universe. It's interesting because thematically it seems fitting, and it's what I wanted, what I spoke about 10 minutes ago. It provides opportunities for the writers to flesh out how society ended up here, and corporate drivel and class stratification now place Mirror's Edge in the same realm as Altered Carbon, Blade Runner, Neuromancer. I love those stories. But there's also a death of identity in this choice. It's now just another sci-fi game, which producer Owen O'Brien seemed to really push back against in the 2008 interview. It certainly allows for grander visuals and more leaps in storytelling, but any social commentary, and this game is heavy on commentary, is all the less striking for its context. So if we examine the narrative, what does the game say? Well, it bloody shouts the themes at you. I mean, in those opening minutes of the game, we have an ominous text scroll explaining that all citizens have been made willing slaves lured into the quest for wealth. Daintily feminine voices talking smooth corporate drivel about endless choices, blessed productivity, and a world ripe for innovators to seize. Alongside this, we see Faith roughly handled in prison, an overcast sky, and once she connects to the network, we see her bombarded by a disgusting amount of lurid, bombastic advertisements, each clouding her vision and vying for her attention. A new recruit in her runner's cabal, Icarus, helps her escape and disconnect from the grid. Faith says it plainly. This is what the workers see, a world of pornographic, mind-numbing advertisements. People are beaten, hopeless, and slave to commercial appetites. It's a grim world, Behind those smooth building facades and reflecting floor-to-ceiling windows, there's a rot beneath. The conglomerate, a handful of billionaire families direct the flow of wealth and progress. Those who live in extreme luxury do so off the exploitation of workers, and while there was once a strong labor movement and revolutionary spirit, it's had the shit kicked out of it by Kruger-sec's private police force. Well, again, Catalyst isn't aiming for subtlety. As alluded to earlier, if you haven't read the comic, you won't know who Dogen is, why Faith was imprisoned, or how she fits into the runner's cabal. Icarus, not to be confused with Project Icarus from the first game, is our first ally in the game, a talented yet grumpy recruit who starts off as a small counterpart to Faith, regularly ribbing her and doubting her ability. Like most of the runners, he is designed to look like how mainstream media describes Antifa protesters. Tattoos, hoodies, masks, sunglasses, terrifying stuff. An obscured anarchist. After a quick tutorial though, we get a title crawl and Faith is introduced to the open world, where she reunites with Noah, the head of her gang and a strong adoptive father figure. At this point in the game, I'm enjoying the suspense, mystery, and even the dialogue. There's a lot of character here and I'm eager to see where the story goes. The first real mission is kind of boring, just teaching you how some of the mini games work and introducing us to Nomad, Faith's kind of best friend who is into graffiti and wears a beanie. Like, she has a photo of him at her bed bunk, but he drops out of the story about 2/3 of the way through for no apparent reason, so it's hard to make of what the developers want us to feel about him. We also meet Birdman, who sends carrier pigeons around with messages and has a cool design, but again, he's never used to service the plot and disappears rather quickly. The second mission kicks the story into action. Faith breaks into Elysium on a paid mission to grab some data. It's your typical glass office with some smooth running set pieces that all goes quite well together until Faith spies another suspicious figure trailing around. Following him into the restricted section, we see the masked interloper stealing data until he's beaten by a well-trained martial artist who happens to be another Asian female. I'll flag this now, the only other Asian female in the game. And we often see flashbacks of Faith with a younger sister who, Anyway, the intruder eats some cyanide and Faith makes off with the data. Again, the story up until here, the end of the first act, is really good. It aims to invest us in the narrative and it's gone smoothly. I have questions, I'm hooked, and I'm ready to see where the game goes. And then it starts to fall apart. We meet an eccentric hacker girl, Plastic, who can decrypt data we stole if we break into another building for processing power, which... what the fuck does that even mean? The writers here are pulling tech jargon out of their ass. It's a cool mechanical level, the design is very vertical and has satisfying combat encounters, and a building explodes, so it's all fun gameplay. And then Faith gets pulled aside by Dogen to run up and cause some damage in a skyscraper construction site where, again, I love the parkour and the scenery is so cool with the city of glass sprawling from horizon to horizon like a map, but nothing is happening to Faith, our character. We're just doing chores and ticking along a vague plot. The only piece of plot significance was seeing Noah fighting with Rebecca Thane, the leader of the Black November revolutionary group. So there's a small chasm here between Noah the pacifist and Rebecca the radical, but I'm playing Faith. I need to care about Faith, and that's not happening yet. The raid against the hideout is a classic move in storytelling, like seeing Hogwarts invaded in the final Harry Potter novel, the hideout overrun at the end of the 100's first season, or even the Guild of Flame at the end of Fable 1. Seeing our heroes' haven and home trashed, overrun, and on fire tugs at a primal instinct, fills us with anger and a want for vengeance. And it works decently here. The hideout is trashed, shattered, aflame, and the harsh brightness of floodlights shrouds the bunker in angry shadows. Faith and Icarus are becoming closer and working together by this stage, and seeing Noah carted off by that woman in white, Faith falls into a rage and beats down wave after wave of Kruger-sec henchmen, finally dragging one of them to learn where Noah was taken. The second stage of the game revolves around Icarus and Faith joining Black November for a time, who have holed out in the city's sewer network. I think the game benefits from this shake-up in environment and character interaction. Faith here has visions of her sister and their separation, and it's clear this trauma still haunts her, but it does little to drive the story. Instead, the missions see Faith prove her worth to Black November by clearing enemies out of the tunnels and eventually playing decoy along a construction site. A fun mission that incentivizes you to dash around since the enemy rifle fire drags just 1 second behind. Really fun gameplay, and since Icarus is there helping us out, it helps us warm to this arrogant bastard who Faith despised at the start of the game. Some genuinely nice character development. But Rebecca is the sour tone of these missions. On the one hand, Rebecca is shown to have a rational critique of society, describing it as an evil oligarchy of rotten capitalism and overconsumption and limited liberty, which is all true. But then it also tries to paint her as a spooky extremist who is pushing too far against the society, that she's too violent and harming in her method of wanting to improve society. But she's not. She's taking prisoners and blowing up buildings, not people. And if the game wanted to run this narrative, then they needed to go nuclear, show her really hurting innocent people, torturing, threatening lives. The effect here is kind of weird. Secondly, Rebecca is plain unlikable. On the one hand, Black November is incompetent, an organization that is stuck in the mud without faith and can't achieve anything unless she's risking her life to pull off some slick moves. Yet Rebecca has the audacity to speak dismissively to our runners, hold them accountable for her failures, withhold information, and act like working for Black November, these ragtag sewer gremlins, is some great privilege. I just don't understand why she had to be quite so unlikable. Anyway, the main plot advancement here is learning that Noah is alive and Rebecca has captured Kruger's daughter, that woman dressed in white, remember? The only other Asian girl in the game, remember? And she's left to stew for interrogation. So we return to Plastic, have a fun set piece of exploring the City of Glass's main security information system to finally figure out that Noah is being held in Kingdom, a scary prison compound. We then pay Dogen a visit to figure out how to get into Kingdom and... shit man, do you see how boring this is? We're just chasing our tail and popping in to visit boring characters when nothing is happening to Faith, our protagonist. And I hate this because it is well scripted. There's drama and the voice actors have put pain and love into these deliveries. But man, there's no substance behind it. Between Plastic, Rebecca, Dogen, Noah, there are too many characters being juggled. And then, when there is something crucial to Faith's character arc, it's told over the bloody radio.
He adopted her. Her real name is Caitlin Connors. Isn't your name Connors too? What if...
It is. I have to talk to her.
Plastic, over radio comms, gives Faith the grand affirmation of her suspicions that Isabel Kruger is her brainwashed sister, Kate. How utterly mundane. Honestly, this is where my investment in the narrative just snapped. I can't even talk about that anymore. In prison, Faith meets Erica, a scientist who used to work with her mother, and we find Noah in time to see him die before we get any last words or closure on their relationship. But before Rebecca kicks Faith and Icarus out of Black November, we learn that Reflection is the secret program Kruger-sec has been working on, essentially a mind-numbing device that will make the population docile and compliant. But, you know, it's hardly that much of a looming threat when society is already beaten down and broken. And yeah, we have a few more missions. I wish I had more to say because the scenery is jaw-dropping and I love so many of the visuals we get through these closing hours. They look pretty and the level design is interesting, and even though the story has done nothing but be bloated, broken, and a bag of cliches, I like playing through these set pieces. But it essentially ends as you would expect. Faith is given another device that can neutralize the reflection if she reaches the height of the Shard, the tallest building in the metropolis, and it's a beautiful mission. Faith starts on a train flying beneath the ocean to reach the skyscraper. She runs across a glass ceiling and hitches an elevator high up. She snags a ride on a massive turbine that powers the entire building, maybe the city, and she's having a blast while doing it. You can even kick a few Kruger-sec soldiers off the bloody balcony. Faith then sees the outrageous wealth of the conglomerate, the fact that they have trees and grass on display, the only greenery we ever see in the entire game. Faith then scales a collapsing elevator shaft and finally rockets up the crumbling office units, glass threatening to shatter with every step she takes, crosses a tightrope between two limbs of the shard, rounds a corner, stumbles across 20 armed Kruger-sec guards before finally reaching the stupefying height of this titan of a building where you have not only the full hazy blue view of the city, but even distant snow-capped mountaintops which you can't spy from anywhere else in the game. I love this set piece, and I only spoke about it for so long since I could show you the footage because I think it's so pretty in case you haven't played the game. But sadly, we must return to the story. Faith succeeds in dropping the USB onto the terminal and stopping reflection. Mr. Kruger comes out and gives his McVillain speech about how Kat is vaguely terminally ill and needs reflection for her health, and besides, people actually want to be subservient and controlled. It's human nature, didn't you know? After beating the shit out of two heavy guards and Kruger himself, Kate makes an appearance, and this is what finally pulls Faith back from the brink. Despite all my flack on the story, this is the fitting way to end the narrative. Faith chasing down Kat, falling off skyscrapers and surviving by the skin of our teeth before a brief fist fight. I mean, yes, the dialogue is pretty trash, but at least all this is personally motivated and involved and concerns Faith. The ending sentiment is a little bizarre. Kat seems to have killed Mr. Kruger off screen and taken over CEO of the world for herself, and she and Faith stare at each other across a chasm and go their separate ways, living separate lives. This seems to be a clear setup for a sequel, Faith feeling affirmed that she can make a difference in the world, and hey, she finally tattooed that drawing she likes, so that's maybe a metaphor for how she's wounded but wiser after her experiences. But yeah, I wasn't moved in the slightest by this narrative, not like I was by the first game, and I kind of felt like my time had been wasted, which is never a nice feeling. The original Mirror's Edge had a lackluster story, but at least it was personal and focused, with that moment of Kat and Faith staring out across the city together, making me feel like something worthwhile had been said about family bonds, perseverance, fighting even when your back is against the wall. Mirror's Edge Catalyst, on the other hand, tries to craft an epic tale, spin multiple plates that captures political interests, factional disputes, and a seedy underworld, and it drops every single plate. If I were to put on my writer's hat and diagnose what went wrong here, I would say there were too many characters, only a vague threat of reflection taking over people's minds, and that Faith's relationship with Kat wasn't the actual centerpiece of the story. And I find this disappointing because I like Catalyst Faith more than the original Faith. I think she's cooler, more mellow, and feels real. She's not facing the world with a wink and a sarcastic one-liner, but she's overwhelmed by the world and fatigued by her circumstances. I think everyone can empathize with that. I loved her voice acting and would actually like to see her in a sequel with a tighter story. But that's the note I think we need to end this video on. As of writing this script, there's no sign of a sequel, and I don't expect we'll ever see one. As much as I rag on Catalyst and its narrative, I think that it's a damn shame. Aside from some of the lagging missions in Catalyst, I did enjoy some of those 12 hours I had across the franchise. The first person parkour, this fluid, is so unique, and the missions and open world are handcrafted to give you phenomenal action set pieces that would feel cheesy anywhere else. Also, if I haven't made this clear, I think Faith is a cool protagonist. Visually, she's cool to look at, but I also respect her quiet stoicism and determination, or the fact that these games try to tell a story of an older sister doing everything in her power to save her little sister. It's nice. Are there any other games that are thematically comparable? Mirror's Edge also reflects to us our own world. I'm half surprised the main villain isn't outright called Jeff Bezos with how much the franchise warns against rampant consumerism, crony capitalism, wealth accumulating into the hands of a few families, and how disadvantaged your average worker is against a surveillance state. These are all powerful themes as a backdrop to a game and deserve more time in the limelight, particularly in the political climate of today. These messages have only become more relevant, and if anybody watches this 5 years from now, that's probably even more the case. So, casting an eye back on the Mirror's Edge franchise, my only regret is that the narrative direction lacks the strength to adequately uphold and present and then critique these ideas. The story is passable at best, but that's not good enough for Mirror's Edge. So those were my scattered thoughts of Mirror's Edge. I have far more I could cram into this video, like bugs I came across in both games, or some criticism about the side missions in Catalyst, but this video was unfocused enough as it was, and I mostly wanted to highlight how different these games were. Honestly, I just want to take a moment to thank people for watching these video essays over the past few months. I don't upload regularly, and when I do, it's sometimes a dumb travel guide or video essay on the history of the myth of Mulan, which most of you probably don't care about. But rest assured, video game critiques are my priority. I'm undecided on what game to look at next. I'm trying to stick to single player narratives under 15 hours, so maybe something like Call of Cthulhu, or Obsidian's isometric RPG Tyranny, or maybe the 2004 Bard's Tale game, which was wacky as all hell. I encourage you to leave a comment if you watch this far, not for anything to do with the algorithm or supporting the video, but because I get notifications on my phone and I like to read them while I'm at work, and hey, scroll down and you'll see I reply to just about every comment, normally while on the bus or between sets at Anytime Fitness. Seriously, if you've never commented on a video before, suggest me a game. I promise I'll reply. So with all that said, thank you for watching.